The neurologist, the medical doctor, is the person who kind of lifts up the hood and checks all the levels inside that engine of your vehicle, okay? They've done cranial nerve testing, have you walk heel to toe, ask you to remember those 3 words, count backwards by 7s, etc. What day is it, so to speak? I call that the 21-point inspection of your brain in the garage. That's the MD, medical doctor, neurologist. As a neuropsychologist, I'm the one who takes your brain on a test drive. Does that make sense? So, none of us have brand new cars up here, so we got to go around the block a few times to check out that car. So that's what I do as a neuropsychologist. So these evaluations last between 4 to 6 hours to really see how that brain is functioning. And most people have a dropped jaw when I say that amount of time, but I'll tell you it actually goes pretty quickly. So that is what I do as a neuropsychologist. I also have been involved with the Healthcare Advisory Committee, and just last week I was actually in Tallahassee advocating for patients with MS. Especially those of you for medications. I talked about insurance companies and the problems with the coupons and still having to pay your copay. And I also talked about the cognitive challenges in MS when I was in Tallahassee, because for an average person to call 5 different numbers within an insurance company to get something done, to get authorization, is unbelievable. But when you have cognitive challenges in MS, what ends up happening? I called, I was online, I was holding for 10 minutes, I'm done now, right? So I really spent a lot of times with some other patients with MS. We had some people that were diagnosed as teenagers with us. I had some older individuals, and it was a great day. So I'm all about doing what we can for the community. So I am going to talk about cognition. And the cognitive cue here for cognition is think of cogs of the wheel. So in your brain, think of the cogs of the wheel that are turning. That is what cognition is. It comes from that term that means thinking skills. So there are a lot of different areas. I look at all these areas when I do cognitive testing, and I'm going to go over each area, but that's just kind of a summary. You all also have all the handouts, so everything is on there, which will be helpful for you to have, because there's a lot of information, okay? Most important thing that I want to talk about with these cogs of the wheel, and I want to talk about multiple sclerosis, okay, and what happens in multiple sclerosis. So a lot of times people say, this person's very bright, they don't have any problems, or this person is having some significant difficulties. There's no way to just assume that people are having a hard time. A lot of times, cognition is invisible, right? Right now, no one in this room, if you look at each other, you have no idea what that ability level is, right? If someone is in a wheelchair using a walker or things like that, we have a better idea, so to speak. We may not actually know, and I don't want to assume, but cognition is invisible. So when you have something happen in your brain, people can't see it until there's an expression of the brain, right? Which is either through talking, through writing, or what it is. Now, there can be correlations, but we don't really know. So that slide really is just to highlight the fact that we don't really know what's going on. Has anyone heard of the term cog fog? Raise your hand. Yep, I see quite a few people in the room. Cog fog. So other terms for that: MS brain, brain fog, cognitive problems, cotton brain. So just the definition of fog: something that obscures and confuses a situation. So it feels kind of foggy. It feels like it's not as fluent as it used to be. I also like to use that word efficiency. The efficiency just isn't there. It's taking longer. It's kind of like you're walking through cotton candy. Does that make sense as you're thinking? So think of foggy as in cloudy and hard to see is your little cognitive cue for that one. There is a website here that you're more than welcome to go to that gives some more information about MS, but I really liked this little diagram that shows all the different words, especially fatigue, cog fog, feeling, cognitive problems, dizziness, loopy. Anyone feel loopy sometimes? That kind of happens, right? There are actually a lot of blogs out there, and I'm going to highlight some of those statements of how people feel. So here's a blog, and if you go to multiplesclerosis.net, here's a good example. As I was saying out loud what I'd planned to say in my head. So you all have a plan in your head, right? Does it always come out the way you plan it? No, it doesn't, exactly. So what happened, I planned to say this in my head, the words just weren't coming out the way they were supposed to. I planned to say something about Colorado, and I said California. Of course, I got looks like, what are you talking about? We're not talking about that. So I confused people. So I tried to correct myself to say Colorado, not California, but I just couldn't get the words out. And my husband, bless him, came to my rescue. How many of you feel like you have people that rescue you with your words sometimes? I think we all do at different times, right? Even if we don't have MS. But in general, it's one of the biggest things that you're like, this person always finishes my sentences. right? And that kind of happens. Another one that I thought was pretty good is one way many occurrences that happen in the evening. Now, like I said, I don't embarrass easily, but I was getting there because these people didn't know why I was having such a difficult time speaking. I couldn't get the words out to explain why, so I just ended up going to bed. I was just done. So in my office, I actually frequently talk about how cognitive problems lead to anxiety, right? And embarrassment. And so what happens over time, if you're having a hard time getting your words out, you don't want to go places where they expect you to talk. So you start avoiding going out with people. If you're going out to certain places and you're having a hard time understanding people, you don't want to be around a lot. So I'll hear a lot of my patients say, I just want to go out with someone one-on-one. Does that make sense? So there's another good example. But this website has a lot of different descriptions. Here's another one that I think a lot of people can kind of relate to. The scariest of all my symptoms, I had to quit driving. I couldn't remember if red meant stop or go. I actually had a patient tell me they pushed the wrong pedal. Well, that's dangerous, right? I've told the same story 4 times in 1 hour to my family. You all hear that sometimes? You told me this before. You told me that before. And then sometimes family are really helpful and they don't tell you. They've already repeated it, right? It took me about a week to remember the name of one of my aunts. Words escape me. Complete thoughts are lost. Any of you have those types of comments that happen? So they're pretty common, right? Pretty common. A lot more ideas, feeling disoriented. You know, I've got to make things work. And the challenge is that many of you have experienced very high functioning lives, correct? And you're used to living at a certain level. And what ends up happening when there's, I call it some cognitive slippage. Have you all heard that term? But it's a little slippage, or you have hiccups in your thinking. It's very, very frustrating. And unfortunately, a lot of some basic physicians, and I do a lot of education with our primaries, are like, oh, that person's high functioning, they're fine. You know, they're still working. We don't need to worry about that. Whereas these little things that can happen are not actually little. They're actually bigger. And being aware of them is really important so you can get evaluated and get the treatment that you need. So Dr. Benedict is one of the big wigs in our field, and he actually created a research protocol for individuals with MS. This is just the clinical bulletin. So when I do my evaluations on patients with MS, I use the battery that he recommended. It is very sensitive to what we call executive functioning, and I'll talk about that. Anyone who's interested, he's a great resource to take a look at. I actually went to one of his trainings. I think most people say they experience some sort of cognitive slippage, maybe a little bit of cog fog, maybe some mild deficits. So the range, people say, well, what's the percentage of individuals who have cog fog or cognitive deficits? So if you look here, look at our numbers. They're ranging all over the place, aren't they? 30%, 70%. So it's really depending on your study. You can look at, we've got studies from the 90s back into the 50s. And you can see the percentages just range. And part of that is just a research bias, and it's a challenge in terms of the methodology. But I think what's important is, look at this term here. Many individuals with MS do not have impairments that significantly impair daily functioning. There might be some mild hiccups in your thinking. You might have those slippage, but it's not a significant impairment to the point that you cannot function. That's important. Not everybody has them to the point that they're debilitating. Does that make sense? And I think that's a really key factor that I want everyone to understand in here. Cognition, we all have varying levels of what we're able to do in different situations. Every person in this room has walked into a room and said, why am I in here? Right? That may or may not significantly impair your daily functioning, right? So I wanted to point that out, that there's a whole level within cognitive impairment and deficits that we want to be aware of, that not everybody has that. So the main problems in MS is slowed thinking and slowed information processing. But speed of processing. A good example, and I think this will come up later, that I like to use with processing. Everyone in here knows ping pong ball, right? Ping pong games? Okay. When you're really good at ping pong, it goes back and forth really fast, right? In general, that's how our Western society talks. Am I correct? You talk back and forth really, really, really fast, and you expect a response really, really fast. That is not how it works when you have executive functioning challenges in MS, because it takes longer to process. So many of my patients, the lady this morning is like, I'm just stupid. I'm like, you're not stupid. You're having a hard time getting the information out and back in and registering. You're a very bright individual, but your speed of processing is not where it needs to be to help you, and that's why you're feeling stupid. Does that make sense? So what I've talked a lot about with ping pong balls, and I think people in here can relate to it, it's kind of like at times you're sitting there and a bunch of ping pong balls are coming at you and they're all different colors. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. I really need to process this information. So let me get all the red ones and put them over here and figure out what they're saying, because this person's firing information at me. Let me get the blue ones over here. Let me get all the different colors and figure it out. Then I can understand it, and then I can share the information back. That is an example of what happens in communication at times with MS. A lot of caregivers and family members will say, they pick up the last two things that I say. I said, because you fired way too many ping pong balls at them before that. So a lot of what I'm sharing, just as Adam had mentioned earlier, it's very important for caregivers and family members to understand how to help and not to help. Does that make sense? Another thing is working memory. I'm going to go over all of these different areas more specifically, but learning, remembering information, and executive functioning. These are what we tend to see in MS challenges. And hard time holding thoughts, can't keep your train of thought, selective and sustained attention. So we're going to talk about attention and working memory. So right now, most people are focused on my microphone and me up here. But if I tell you right now to focus on any sounds of bags or anyone eating, your attention goes elsewhere. Or the hum of the lights, or focus on where you're sitting and how the seat feels. So selective attention is selecting what you're going to focus on and ignoring everything else, pretty much, okay? And at times, it's hard to do that, right? Especially like I mentioned kind of in the beginning, if you're going out to eat and you don't want to be in a very busy restaurant, right? Because it's hard to focus. It's hard for me to understand and focus on someone else when I'm in a loud environment. So paying attention to what you're going to focus on, and there's multiple demands to your attention. So a lot of recommendations that I write for my patients are if they need to get work done at work. For example, if you're at work or if you're at home and you're studying and you're doing a class, I have a lot of my patients up into their 80s that are taking classes. They're great OLLI classes, and UNF, if you know this, offers free classes if you're over 65. You can audit all the college courses in any state university. Anyway, as an aside, am I still there? They're taking classes, so you know what I tell them to do? You turn off your email while you're working on the computer. Because what happens if your email's on? Bing, 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 right? So what happens to your attention? You're working on something, ooh. It's hard for anyone to do that. So how do you find a place that is minimal distraction so you can focus and get your work done, right? What you need to do. And then there's all that whole idea of like toddlers running into the room and focusing, going here. I have a lot of family members that live with grandchildren. And they're like, I'm just trying to get this done, and I'm pulled in 15 bazillion other directions. So this is what attention and concentration and working memory are. So you can see, I have my little ping pong balls here, right? Ping pong ball game. So we process things at different times. I have some patients that actually wear buttons. Many of you may have heard of aphasia. It's a difficulty of being able to speak and communication. I have a woman who has a button. She goes, please know that I have communication problems. I need you to slow down so I can understand what you have to say. And I need you to take time with me. Because I will tell you, I lived overseas for about 5 years, and I came back to the States at the time when the cash back ATM cards were here. I had no idea about any of this, and my husband and I were in line. I said, don't leave me, because I don't know what's going on here in America. Well, of course he did. So I'm standing there, and I'm trying to pay, and the lady's like, cash back? And I'm looking at her like, and you know, people think if you speak louder, it helps. So she goes, cash back? And I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm using that example as we need to advocate for ourselves. I did not know what she was talking about, so I just avoided. And I guarantee you that when you have communication deficits or difficulties, you just avoid, right? You just stop, you shut down, and you go talk to somebody else. But that example really is, I need to advocate for myself. One of my patients with Parkinson's has a button that says, I'm not drunk, I have Parkinson's, with her tremors, you know? And so it's really advocating for yourself. So this is a good thing. Like, I might miss what someone says. And I love this. One of my patients in my group said, my 2 speeds are slow and slower. You know, you need to slow down for me, because we're not a slow society. Think about it. If you don't respond on a telephone call for the count of 3, people like you say, are you there? Are you there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right? A good example of processing speed, and I'm going to use Kaylee as an example. I'm going to give you the one way to do it and another way, okay? Women are very, very, very bad at this. We talk way too fast, and we often talk over each other, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. Kaylee, there's going to be a birthday party on Saturday. It's going to be in the park at 2 o'clock. Remember the cupcakes? You got it? You got it? Yep. Okay, so that's a little bit too much, right? So here's an alternative way. Kaylee, Saturday, 2 o'clock, in the park, cupcakes. Could you repeat that back to me?
Saturday in the park at 2 o'clock, cupcakes.
So y'all see what I did? I will tell you many of our family members, many of our friends speak to us that way at times. And sometimes it really doesn't matter. But if we really want that information, thank you, Kaylee, to get in, you see what I did? I took out all those extraneous words. I slowed down. And if you realize at the end of it, I counted to 5 in my head before I said, did you get that? We tend not to do that in this society, correct? This is what you can share with family members and people who are working with you. Now, if I spoke to Kaylee like that all the time, she's going to bop me because it's annoying all the time, right? But if the information is important, you start with that and then go write it on the whiteboard. I'm going to talk about the use of a whiteboard as another aid. Memory, there's a lot of different types of memory. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a lot of people say to me, well, you know, I'm having a hard time remembering where I put this, or I have a hard time with that. The thing about memory that I want to share is actually the process of memory, because in general, we do not have a major storage and retrieval problem in MS, because MS is a connection syndrome. So the deficit actually comes in the attention part. It's hard to pay attention, so it's not actually getting encoded and put into your brain efficiently. Where the difference is, I have a lot of patients that sit in my chairs and worry about Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's disease, storage is gone. The attention is beautiful. You can talk to someone for 5 minutes. I've done a lot of training with postdocs and interns, and they think, oh, that person's fine. I said, no, they have severe Alzheimer's disease. In 10 minutes, it'll all be gone. Whereas in MS, the profile is more difficult with attention. It's harder to get the information in, but once it's in there, it doesn't go away. So I often challenge a lot of my patients with MS to think about it as more, I have an attention and encoding problem rather than a memory problem. Does that make sense? I want to make sure this is clear. In order to remember something, you got to pay attention, right? So if the attention isn't there because you're being distracted by other things or information's not organized, it doesn't get into your brain as well. Does that make sense? So it's really getting it in there. So the encoding is how you get it in, storage is organizing it, and then retrieving is pulling it out, just like a filing cabinet. So a good example I often say with patients is I'm going to say some words to you. I'm going to tell you to go grocery shopping, okay? So I want you to go get broccoli and cheese and eggs and meat, bacon, for example, and milk and carrots and pork. So I can have you just remember that in that order. Or what could I do? How could we use a memory aid to help us remember that list? Any ideas? Break it down in categories. Excellent. That is organizing it, because that helps your attention get it encoded into your brain. So remember all the produce, right? The vegetables, for example. Remember all the dairy, and then remember the meat, for example. So if anyone has ever seen on the circular kiosks at Publix, and this isn't an announcement about Publix, but in Publix they have the lists all organized by categories. Has anyone ever seen those, the green ones? Great strategy for when you're doing your grocery list. I have some patients that are much more visual. So they actually have a map of Publix or Winn-Dixie or whichever grocery store, and that's how they do their grocery list. Because really, you don't need to run over here and get milk and then run over here and realize I need to go get cereal. Oops, I need to go back over here and get eggs. It's all about stepping back, planning, and organizing. So that helps you encode it and get into your brain. And that's a good segue. So there's our mental maps with visuospatial skills. Right now, can everyone close your eyes for one moment for me and think about the grocery store you mostly go to? And think about when you walk in the door, what is over to your right, and kind of what's over against the back wall, and what's over to the left. Okay, and you can open your eyes. Anyone have a really, really hard time doing that? Or most people pretty good with that? Yeah, you didn't really have to think about it a whole lot, do you? It's automatic. So creating those mental maps. I have some people that are able to say, okay, I'm going to go in and I need to get these 3 things. And what happens? You get in there and you forget, right? So some people have realized I need to write it down because that'll help me. So I'm going to write my list. Some people have realized if I think of the map of the store and the way that I walk, I always walk from the right around the store. What are the items I need to remember? But in general, we have a hard time forming some of that. So using those tools can be very, very helpful. Oftentimes I'll have people say they get lost. I also hear that complaint of, I'm driving and I just miss my exit. Anyone do that? Or I get in the car, I'm on autopilot, I'm going this direction because I always go this way to work, but it's Sunday and I'm not going that way, and I end up like, where am I? That's just a routine. That's part of it's already in us. It's routine memory. It's something we've always done. Those are more attentional issues, but there's also some challenges that can happen with visual spatial abilities. So the biggest part of MS, which is a connection syndrome, and I'm going to go through some of the brain pathology for you, is what we call executive functioning. Has everyone in this room heard that term, executive functioning? Okay. So I want to really explain what it is. Everyone in here, I believe, at some point, either live or on television, has seen an orchestra. In the orchestra, you have all the sections, right? You have the wind instruments and the string instruments and the percussion, etc. Just like in your brain, you have attention and language and memory and visual spatial skills. What do you have to have up front of that orchestra to make sure it does what it's supposed to? Conductor, exactly. And that conductor doesn't just willy-nilly move his or her arms around, like I could not be a conductor, right? That conductor keeps time like a metronome, right? That conductor makes sure that everything is moving at the accurate speed and time. That conductor says crescendo, get louder. That's like selective attention, pay attention over here. Put more emphasis here. Decrescendo, get softer over here. The conductor of the orchestra is really facilitating and making sure everything's doing what it's supposed to. So it comes together as a beautiful symphony. Otherwise, you have a cacophony, it doesn't sound right, right? In our brains, we actually have 5 conductors that sit right here. And these are the different things that they do. Working memory, that's like, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to say 3 numbers to you, keep them in your head, and try to say them reverse order back to me. Okay, like if I said 1, 2, you would say 2, 1. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 numbers, think of them in your head, and then say them backwards for me. 4, 6, 2. 2, 6, 4. That's working memory, holding it in your mind. Okay, like if I said there's a math problem. There are 10 people, each person has 4 crayons. How many do they have in all? 40. Right, so you have to hold that. That's working memory. That's one of the things that our conductor does. Another one is activation, arousal, and effort. Some people say, my get up and go, got up and went. It's that get up and go. It's that being able to have have that inner cheerleader keep you going. It's that fire inside of you. Many people in this room probably experience what we call apathy. Apathy is that get up and go. Some people say it's more depression, but a lot of times it's apathy. You just don't have that motivation. It's not what it used to be. That can happen in different mood disorders, mental disorders in terms of mood and mental health, but it also happens when those connections in the front part of your brain aren't working as well, which is what happens in MS. Okay. Another one is emotional control. Has anyone in here ever said something they wish they hadn't? Yes. Okay. Another thing that conductors do, the conductors have a little gate in your brain, and every once in a while they open up and let little bits out. Right now, everyone knows I'm going to keep it closed. I'm an appropriate, this workshop, I need to listen. I'm going to be appropriate. But what ends up happening if all day you're working really hard to do this? What happens when you step over that threshold and you get home? Right? It all just floods out. All of that stuff comes out. And I often hear, I don't know why she treats me this way, or he says these things to me, because you've worked so hard all day to keep those conductors in line. Does that make sense? Another one is internalizing language. Keeping yourself on track. So you, like I said, you walk into the room, you forget why you're there. Keeping yourself on track. The conductor has to keep everything on track, right? And the last one is complex problem solving, be able to sort through and make decisions, etc. I hope most people in here are familiar with I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball. Anyone remember the chocolate scene at the factory? Okay, perfect. So I often will play that at this time. So the chocolates are coming, it's all systematic, right? Like one at a time, she can package them, they were fine. Perfect, she's got a great description right here. But what ends up happening when the speed gets off? She's like, what do I do? And she's stuffing them in her bra, she's putting them in her mouth because she can't handle it, it's overwhelming. So that is a visual, great, I'm glad we got some laughter. That is a visual representation of what can happen when your conductor goes offline. Everyone get what I'm saying? So here's a couple examples. So I don't feel like it. I don't have the energy. Son of my get up and go, got up and left. I'm good. You go ahead and decide. I would imagine a few of us in here have that complaint that he or she never makes a decision. They just tell me to do whatever. Does that ever happen to any of you all? So what is very, very helpful for those of you that are caregivers or family members of individuals with MS is to give options. Would you like to go to Carrabba's or would you like to go to Bonefish for dinner? Choose one. Okay? So the thing is, if it's open-ended, and I'll have so many couples that I work with and families and partners that say, they just won't make a decision and I don't want to make all the decisions, that people can make decisions if you give them structure. And I think that's real important. On another note, that's really, really a helpful strategy that I've worked with a lot of my speech and cognitive therapists for, going out to eat. How many times are you sitting there with this huge menu, right? And you're like, The waiter wants me to order right now. There's a time element, correct? And it's usually, I'll just have what she's having, that's fine, or I'm just gonna order what I always order, because then I don't have to worry or stress about it, right? So a great strategy, I'm gonna talk about doing a communication center in your home, but a great strategy is to print out 5 menus from your most popular restaurants. And you plan ahead, you know, on Saturday, tomorrow night, we're gonna go out for dinner and we're gonna go to this restaurant. So actually going through your menu, figuring out what you're gonna have, imagine how great the waiter or waitress would think you are if you show up with a Post-it note with your order on it. Golden, right? And what you've done is you've actually planned, you've made a menu, you've actually written it down, you've used your cognitive power to do that. And you're not sitting there in a group and feeling embarrassed because you can't make a quick decision. What do you all think about that idea? It's a good idea, right? So most of our menus are available online now. But the key to this is planning and organizing, knowing ahead. It's not just driving, oh, where do we want to go now, right? It's kind of planning. So here's another one. So why are all these things important? What I look at as a neuropsychologist, I look at your brain in terms of thinking, I look at your heart in terms of emotions, and I also look at your body in terms of medical, physical, okay? We all know when you have a hard time thinking about something, you get frustrated. When you can't come up with your words and everyone's staring at you and you're like, oh, I'm getting embarrassed, I'm getting anxious. I have people who don't leave their house because of this now. It's pretty sad. We know when you're stressed out, it affects your body. You know, your blood pressure goes up, you feel anxious. So really, the couple of things up here, cognitive issues are really the primary cause that people leave the workplace. I had an individual with MS, I'm doing a disability evaluation with her right now, and what happened, actually 7 years before diagnosis, she started having problems at work. And she started getting like negative work reviews. She's like, I've never had that, but now I have to go in an hour before work starts so I can get my stuff done and plan because I don't have enough time. Because I can't be as efficient as I used to. I have people staying an hour, 2 hours later to get the work done that they used to do. And they just are thinking this is normal, part of aging. I'm like, no, actually this happens sometimes with MS and some with different neurodegenerative disorders. Cognitive changes can impact a person's self-esteem, self-confidence, interfere with communication, and relationships. So it's really important to understand, although we're just talking about cognition, it affects all those different areas. So you can see the impact on daily functioning. So when you're cognitively intact, not as much, but when you're impaired, look at that. Work status, social, personal assistance, community services, financial, transportation, and living environment. Individuals with cognitive impairment were significantly less likely to be employed. I've actually seen quite a few of my MS patients in their 50s that are having a hard time with work. And unfortunately, I actually have a pretty good population of teachers that have been teaching for a while. And what happens? When you're a teacher, you're a conductor, right? Think of all the things you have to take care of. You got to manage behavior, right? You got to keep the lesson plan. All those things, their conductors don't work anymore. So very, very challenging to keep up that level of work. So looking at all these different things in the brain, these are just some information on this slide. I'll pass that one on to you. But what I really want to explain to you is how the myelin works. I think everyone understands, but I like to give this analogy because I think it helps cognitively. Everyone in here knows an electrical wire, right? It's copper, usually insulated in red, blue, green, that sort of thing. The copper wire is like the neurons in your brain, okay? And the insulation on the wire is like the myelin, and that's why it's white. Okay, so in your brain you have something called white matter, and you also have something called gray matter. Picture in your mind an apple, okay? So an apple, inside the apple you have seeds, right? Usually I draw this up on my whiteboard for my patients, but you have seeds in an apple. That would be the gray matter, it's dark. Those are things like the big centers of your brain, hippocampus, those things. When you bite into the apple, it's white, correct? Those are all the pathways. These pathways, and as I mentioned, they go from deep inside your brain, a lot of them up to that frontal lobe. So we're going from the seeds up to the front. That's what gets affected in MS, a lot. So what ends up happening, these signals, they're not blood channels, they're fueled by oxygen, okay? And when you have lesions, it breaks down those connections. And white matter, this isn't just something you can't see. I've actually held brains on autopsy, and you can see strings. There's strings in your brain of white strings of the myelin and the sheets around the axons and the neurons that are sending those signals, okay? So those do get disrupted, and that's what's happening in MS. Do you all understand what I'm saying? So that's why there are these hiccups in your thinking, because some people say, well, one day I can do this and it's no problem, but the next day I can't, because it's inconsistent. Depending on where the lesions are, some of those pathways are affected and sometimes they're not. strategies. And I said our problem, some of it is our society, right? And our expectations in society, that we're such a quick society. Think of these smartphones. They're all smarter than we are. We don't even know how to use half of the things we can on them, right? Speed of processing and expectation. We're a very anticipatory society. We anticipate what's going to happen and what we need. That's kind of our market, right? And then also being able to pay attention. So I put a stop sign up here. One of the biggest things we can do for our brain is to stop. Think, breathe, and plan. And a good reminder for that, I have some people who take Post-it notes and draw a stop sign on them. But actually in my office, I just take little purple Post-it notes and I put them around the room. Because I say, well, if you look around, it's going to remind you, wait, before I say something, before I do something, let me stop and think about it. So I have people put Post-it notes around their house, in their car, at different places at work. Before they go to do something, they stop, think about it, plan, and do it. But I'll tell you, that is very hard for a lot of my patients who are used to just walking into that meeting and just speaking, right? And just speaking off the top of their head. They used to always do this, and they're like, well, I don't want to stop and plan, Dr. Prosje. I just want to go in there and do it. And I said, so you have two choices. You go in there and do it, and you don't succeed. And when you don't succeed and you fail, emotionally, it's really, really hard. Or you step back and you take a half an hour and plan the night before or the morning of, and you go in and you succeed. I have a very high-functioning attorney in town that I work with, and every day before he leaves, he spends 30 minutes and plans out his next day. But that acceptance that you need to step back and do that is really, really hard. That's where the psychology piece comes in. Do you all understand what I'm saying with that? Because we're just used to, let me just jump in and do it. I don't need to think about it. But unless you stop and plan, you may be setting yourself up for failure rather than success. And I don't want to set anyone up for failure. On a side note on that, I had a patient who never left her house, okay? She was still paying her gym membership. I'm sure there's at least one person in here who might still be doing that and doesn't go to the gym. But anyway, this lady was still paying her gym membership. I had said to her, I said, I want you to go to the gym and I want you to sit in the waiting room for 10 minutes. That is your homework assignment in the next week. So you know what ended up happening? 4 days later, she emails me, Dr. Prosje, I went to the gym and I got on the treadmill for 20 minutes and I've been in bed for 3 days. And I said, okay, you didn't listen to me because I wanted you to succeed. And I said, unless you follow, because I know how to set you up for success. But she didn't, did she? She thought, I can do this because that's what we think we can do. But what ends up happening is that negatively reinforces her and she's not going to go. So really understanding yourself and having to step back and say, I can't do what I used to, but I'm going to succeed in little steps. We all want to do that big jump. You all probably remember the movie, What About Bob? You got to take baby steps. But everyone wants to jump that far. There's an image of a turtle that as long as you're moving forward, it's progress. So this was a study and research that I did when I was at Emory years ago. It's actually been published, and I'll talk to some of my cog and speech therapists about it. It's called EON-EXEC, which is Ecologically Oriented Neurorehabilitation of Executive Functioning. They published it for memory, and they also published it for executive functioning. And it is cognitive rehab. I was trained in it, and I do it with some of my patients. I actually had a psychiatrist who had a stroke, and I got him back to be able to give lectures at Emory when I was there years ago. What the basis of their program is for executive functioning is the direct strategy. And I'm going to show you on each one. So this is just a good strategy for you all to think about when you're trying to sort out and having some challenges with executive functioning direct. So D is distractions. So you want to decrease your distractions, decrease interruptions, keep a steady rate. What are your earnings? Some people in here say if I spend 20 minutes on the computer, I can then get up and go get a piece of chocolate. If I get this done, then I get to have X. Or, earnings, how can you bribe yourself to get things done that keeps that motivation going? Complexity, you don't want things to be too complex because it's hard to stay focused. And everyone in this room knows when their most productive time of the day is, and when tiredness happens, what happens? Just like now, if that food's going and you're getting sleepy, your brain's not going to work as well. There are some people who function best at 5:30 in the morning. There's some people, I just had a patient now who's coming back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to do 3 hours of testing with me because that's her best time of the day. Okay, some people I see at 6:30 in the morning, it just depends. So I like this slide because it shows you, in terms of rate, it's kind of like the I Love Lucy, right? This is a little bit too complex. You see what she's got going on? That is just a disarray all around her. She's on the phone and she's doing something on the computer. Too many things going on, she's not going to succeed at any of them, okay? And this one, he's just too tired to do anything. And if you have teenagers and they like to stay up till midnight, try to do their homework, probably not the best thing. But I don't know if you can wake them up at 5 a.m. either. So you kind of look at what works for you. And just understanding the rate of how things are going. So when you have slowed thinking, these are just some ideas that you can say to people. What you need, wait, please slow down for me, that example I gave you with Kaylee. Also, I don't know if any doctors in here have ever prescribed video games for you, but I want you to know, about 15 years ago, AAN, the Academy of Neurology, published on how important video games are for your thinking skills. And there's actually an active study that's just been done, and it's nationwide, and they studied people from ages 70s into their 80s for 10 years. The only thing that decreased the risk of dementia was speeded games. So people tell me they do Sudoku all day, they do Scrabble, they do solitaire, and I said, you need to put a timer on for 2 minutes and see how much you can get done. These are all things that are going to help speed of thinking. I have a whole bunch of websites as well, but the processing speed and working on speeded games has been the most proven to really help thinking skills over time. In terms of remembering information, you can have a memory notebook, keeping track of information, setting alarms and timers. I frequently get that comment, I forget to take my medication all the time, Dr. Prosje. And I said, well, do you have a smartphone? Yes. Well, let's set an alarm. Well, I just snooze it. Okay. So let's set an alarm at 8 a.m., 8:02 a.m., because by 8:02 a.m., you're like, well, this is kind of annoying. By 8:03 a.m. or 8:04 a.m., you're like, okay, Dr. Prosje, I'm going to take my meds now. You set 3 alarms to remind you. Because we all know you're in the middle of doing something right now. If something went off on my phone, I'm not paying any attention, right? So you set a few reminders. I have some families that are using Alexa in an amazing way to help them on this. They constantly have Alexa say, it's time to have your lunch, time to have your lunch. Central location, a lot of people put baskets right by their door because you go out the door and you forget stuff, right? How many times you go back in, oh, I forgot my wallet, oops, I forgot my phone, oops, I forgot this. I've made signs on the doors for patients of reminders, color-coded, to help them remember what to take with them. But a basket right by the door to put that library book in, that umbrella. How many of you forget umbrellas? Patients come in my office with their umbrellas, it sits by the door so that we remember to take it out. So little strategies like that to kind of help you. Here's another good example of looking at a map at the grocery store, puzzles, board games. There's actually a lot of good online puzzles as well. I am a big person about board games. And one of the main reasons for that is because I really want social interaction for all my patients. So I talk about cognitive stimulation, which is your brain, physical stimulation, moving your body, and social. And board games get what? They get both social and cognitive. It's turn-taking. Uno is a great game to play, especially if we have people from other different types of neurodegenerative diseases they're declining, you can play Uno and just match color. Okay, that's an adaptation. I have a few of those too. There's a lot of great games out there. I have people playing bridge into their 70s and 80s, Mahjong, Bunko, all those different games. It's social and it's keeping your brain active. And there's a speed element, right? Because you have to respond pretty quickly. So I've already talked about this, the stop, breathe, think, and plan. There's a whiteboard, and I'm going to talk about these other two here. So this is a stop and plan idea. So I actually pulled this slide from when I did a conference, looks like 3 years ago now. This whiteboard has been so helpful for so many of my families. I actually did an example with a family yesterday. Sometimes we lose track of the day. So we want to prime our brain the day before. So what I tell people is the night before or the afternoon before, talk about what the next day is going to be. Actually write the full date up at the top. And then what's the plan? Do we need to wake up at a certain time? I have patients that I see some mornings at 7:30. No one is going to wake up and get them eggs and grits and bacon and all those things, right? So we talk about what do you want for breakfast? We can do a granola bar. We can do oatmeal. What are we going to do that's going to maximize the time? We step back and we stop, breathe, and plan the day before. Because for some of my patients who have some significant real memory problems, you wake up in the morning, you don't know what day it is, you know what the plan is, your anxiety is through the roof. So when you know that whiteboard is there, you can follow it, okay? I know some people may be on their way. You've got the slides, you're great. But really paying attention to what goes on, because what happens is your main tool is the other person in your house, and you're constantly like, what day is it? What are we doing today? What's happening today? And the more you say, what's happening today, what are we going to do, the person gets tired, right? And that person is your main tool. I want you to have other tools. So a whiteboard is a great thing, and you actually plan everything out on the whiteboard. This is the Kanban board. Has anyone heard of a Kanban board? It's actually an IT concept, and you start with Post-it notes, and you have a whole list of Post-it notes of things to do. And it could be the honey-do list around the house. It could be something you need to do for a class. It could be anything. And as you're doing them, you move them over, and when they're done, think of the accomplishment that that creates. And it's a visual way of seeing it. My teenage daughter actually does this on her mirror. She has a closet of full-length mirrors, and she moves her assignments over, and that's how she organizes. So she knows what she's done, what she's in the midst of doing, and what she still needs to do. You can color code them with different Post-it notes. Another organizational system. But take a look at the Kanban board. It's a great strategy. If anyone has heard of this clock, this is an amazing clock. You can see it from like 20 feet away. And it will always tell you if it's morning or night. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, get a little confused, is it time to wake up? Also, my family lives by the visual timer because you have no sense of time. You say 5 minutes, people don't really know. We're leaving in 5 minutes, you don't really have an idea. So turning the visual timer on, you can actually see it. So these are other good organizational strategies. Different board games, I've given you some ideas here. And then this is a really good website, brainline.org, has a lot of apps that you can use. It's not necessarily brain injury that everyone with MS has, but it gives you a lot of different strategies and apps. The We is a great thing to use. We used to use that on the rehab floor when I was at UAB. There's a whole list of websites. This one, the Shepherd software that is starred, is free. And I actually did a workshop at UF at the Towers and showed everyone this, and there's a ton of games that are all free that are just speeded as fast as you can go. And you just spend 5 minutes. This is not the time for people, family members, to say, well, we're going to do an hour of thinking exercises every day. No. I'd rather 5 minutes, have a routine. Get up in the morning, brush your teeth, have your breakfast, 5 minutes of the game, move on. Okay? A couple caregiver tips. Not competitive. We're going to be collaborative, communicate, ask. Some people don't want you to hold the door open for them because they can open it themselves, is a good example. Offer help when requested. Prompt a person. So don't say, did somebody call? Give a cue. Did this person call? Somebody called. I was looking for a call from Joe, Sue, or Mary. Who called? Instead of wide open, it really helps. Central list of information, a whiteboard. So I often tell families to get a whiteboard and have a communication area with the whiteboard, the day clock, and all the menus. And it's all centrally located. And then you can also write on there, hey, I just left to go to Publix. I'll be back in an hour. So you don't have to feel like you have to call that person and find out what's going on. It just gives a lot more independence. And then this is my take-home message here is use it or lose it. And remember that you are not stupid. You may feel that way at times, but these are more hiccups in your thinking, okay? And this is kind of the wave of the future. I'm going to end with just a brief story about one patient that I started seeing when he was 88 years old. He had lost his wife, and he came in with his little bow tie on. He goes, Dr. Prosje, because he was having some executive functioning challenges, and he had some tremors starting, and he said, I'm taking a Shakespeare class. I said, really? He said, yeah, I want to interact with people who are lively and younger than me, and I am not going to be one of those old people. I'm not going to be those old people coming in on the tour bus and everyone getting off all decrepit. I'm going to keep myself active. Well, I told him at that point, after his wife had passed, to start writing a journal of what he had been doing every month. He's now, and I get goosebumps, he's now 95, and he still faxes me his journal every month. Do you know how great that is for his brain? He goes through his entire calendar, and he keeps track of everything he's been doing. And he's kind of my poster child for staying active. And I'll tell you, he has more energy and is more engaged than some of my much younger patients by 3 or 4 decades. So please, that big statement of use it or lose it is really, really important. And I think that's my last slide. So hopefully this has given you some information. Hopefully you all learned something or got something out of it. Thank you all for coming today.